would like to introduce you to our presenters today. We have Ray, Makela, and Sam Herring. Please, guys, if you could turn the camera so we can show everyone your beautiful faces, I would really appreciate it. Thank you. Sam and Ray, they are live with us. So on the left side of the slide, we have Ray, and also joining us live through his camera. He's an author, a speaker, and business executive with 25 years of management, consulting, and sales experience. At Sales Readiness Group, Ray oversees all client engagements and the delivery of sales and sales management training programs. He has delivered programs for clients such as Alcon, AIG, Cisco, Nielsen, Follett, Pandora, Galderma, and Walmart. Then we also have Sam Herring joining us from Intrepid. Sam is a leader in the corporate learning industry for over 20 years. He's past CEO of learning consulting business, as well as Intrepid Learning, the collaborative learning technology business acquired by VitalSource in 2017. Under his leadership, the Intrepid business has won over 65 industry awards and attracted industry-leading customers and partners such as Microsoft, Mayo Clinic, Cargill, Deloitte, Inset, Stanford, and ATD. Ray and Sam, I'll let you take it from here.
Well, outstanding, Alonso. Thanks for getting us kicked off and getting everybody oriented. And just thrilled with the response to this topic. And I can see by the number of registrations and actually the number of attendees here, we have a huge audience, Sam, that's really interested to collaborate and talk about this topic. And I know this has come up for us over the last couple of weeks as we've been collaborating on a few client opportunities and talking about ways to work closer together. And I think it's really nice to be able to share some of those thoughts as well as share some of our own experiences, both from Sales Readiness Group perspective as a sales training and sales management training company, and Intrepid providing a platform and a real collaborative way to connect and support the training. But maybe we can start, Sam, if you wouldn't mind just saying a little bit more about your background and kind of how you come to this topic today in terms of what we're going to share.
Yeah, thanks, Ray. Delighted to be with everyone in this brave new world that we're entering. I put together my home office this weekend, so you've got the personal effects in the background as a sign of authenticity. So yeah, we've, as Alonso said in the beginning, I've got a lot of background in the corporate learning space and in workplace learning, both from a professional services as well as a platform perspective. And we've been hearing from our customers and our partners in the last week or so that there's just an intense practical need to say, hey, I have in-person programs that I've been delivering or plan to deliver. How do I pivot to an effective digital format quickly? So that's really what we've been hearing loud and clear. And this was a last-minute slide addition that came to me this morning. I was downstairs having my coffee, and I heard this like kind of teacher type of voice in the background. And so I walked into the dining room, and I see my two children, Malcolm on the left and Annika on the right, doing a digital lesson, learning how to draw, learning how to illustrate. And I was like, wow, this is beautiful. I mean, this is such an inspiration. The kids are adapting just immediately to this work from home environment, this brave new world that we've entered. And I just thought that, you get such inspiration out of these kinds of things. So, just for those of us out there who are stressed, as all of us are, I know, you got this. We're going to figure this out together. So that's where we're coming from.
No, that's great. And what a great illustration, Sam, and beautiful kids, and to see them, leaning in, and for them, it's not as much of a pivot, right? It's like, oh, watch something on YouTube and learn from it. Like you said, we got this, no problem. And we'll talk about how that has evolved, even over the last month, as we're trying to do things quicker and trying to make that pivot. I mean, from an SRG perspective, we've been delivering virtual training for over 10 years, actually started with that more as a focus and found that really a blended solution of instructor-led and virtual, sometimes for reinforcement, for coaching, or sometimes fully delivered virtual programs and on demand, was better depending on the client needs, and we'll talk about what some of those dynamics are. But it's really interesting to see how it's really coming to fruition, literally just in time here, as we're all trying to respond and react. So one of the things we want to do as we go through the agenda is really to keep this as interactive as possible, and maybe even more so for those of you who have attended webinars in the past, but really getting your input, hearing from you all, and then trying to save time and interaction for questions and collaborating at the end. And one of the things I think will be really interesting is if we can pull out some of the key questions and also some of the lessons that are shared, and we'll provide that as a follow-up post as well. So anxious to kind of jump into it. Where we want to start is really talking about some of the challenges. Let's get it out there. What are some of the challenges related to travel restrictions and work from home and everything else we're hearing? But also, what are some of the underlying opportunities that may provide for us? So we'll kind of tee it up with that. Then we're going to talk about what is the learning modalities, what are different options we have, and how do you identify what's right given your situation? And I know even as we're getting registrations for this webinar, we're getting a lot of comments about trying to choose the right content to pivot or to make the migration, trying to figure out the right technology stack or the right solutions, and also how to do it very quickly and cost effectively. So we'll talk about first how to identify and then share some of the best practices that we've collected over the years and we've heard from our clients about migrating the classroom to more of an online or digital format, and some of the things to keep in mind. And then as we mentioned, sharing digital and lessons learned along the way. So Sam, before we jump into it, any other comments or thoughts on the agenda? I know we've talked about this over the last week and really pleased with how it's all come together.
Yeah, just trying to make this, ruthlessly relevant for y'all, and we want to hear your ideas too. We want to hear what you're seeing, what you're doing, your questions, but also your best practices and what's working, what you're trying. We're all in this learning moment together. It's one of the things I've been hearing is there's that saying, don't let a crisis go to waste, to innovate and try new things. So we do have an opportunity here to innovate and try under new constraints to do things better. So I think that's the optimistic view that I know Ray and I have.
Oh, that's great. No, great perspective. So, all right, so let's go and we'll jump into it, and we'll kind of get the first interaction here. What we would love, and some of you chimed in initially, just as we were getting started, and Alonzo was kind of warming things up here. But we'd love to hear from you. How have some of your sales training initiatives been impacted by the current situation? And if we could, go ahead and just chat that into the question box. That's the best way. We'll get those responses just like you did at the beginning. But we'd love to hear from you. What are you seeing? And Sam, as we were talking about this, it's everything from what we've heard is things are on hold. We're trying to figure it out. We're trying to pivot by next week. We're trying to move to e-learning. We're trying to repurpose our budgets. There are a lot of different ways to kind of look at this, but really love to understand, from folks chiming in. So we're already getting some responses. So Jimmy said all things are canceled. So we certainly have heard that. We have another response. Miles says the face-to-face has been canceled for at least the next 2 months, but that opens things up maybe for other options. Lori mentions live sessions have been called off indefinitely, but again, moving to VILT, as people are saying. Okay, this is really interesting. As an L&D expert, received many requests to help move to virtual. So I think that's a pretty common theme we're hearing. People can't fly for a 10-week course, or they were flying in to attend a 10-week course, and so they're trying to figure out how to respond to that appropriately. Sam, and it's really interesting as we're getting the responses, it really speaks to how large our audience is, and a lot of the common thoughts that are coming in. What do you think of what we're hearing from the audience? Is that consistent with some of what you've heard from your clients as well?
Yeah, I mean, it was a couple weeks ago, like last week of February, we started getting these questions from partners and customers, and Ray and I don't know if we mentioned this, but we're both in Seattle, so we're kind of at like ground zero of the outbreak, and so this trickle started to come in, but it was all around this question of how do I pivot to digital fast while ensuring that I have impact and effectiveness with this change. So this is exactly consistent with what we've been hearing.
Yeah, and one other kind of different theme that I just read, and I think this is really interesting, the comment that what point do we pause making sales calls so we don't annoy customers and prospects when we're dealing with this new environment? And I think that, that's kind of the challenge and potentially opportunity, but completely agree, right? If we're having everybody say, hey, you still got to make your 80 calls a day, and they're calling saying, do you want to buy this? We're probably going to get not a very warm reception and actually some frustration as everybody's fighting the fire trying to figure it out, versus maybe checking in and just saying, hey, just want to reach out, see if there's anything we can do to help, how are things going? And I think it also brings up the opportunity, what do we do with some of that additional time while people aren't on airplanes, they're not in front of their customers, or maybe they're not making 80 calls a day? Well, maybe we can sharpen the saw, right? And we'll talk about that, but how do we utilize this time to hopefully come out stronger at the end? But great comment from Carl, I appreciate him mentioning that. What do you think about that, Sam?
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of like how can we thinking about how we can be of service, and that we've got all different types of industries and people from different representing different companies on the line, but we gave that a lot of thought ourselves. Is like, how can we be of service in this moment, and what is the way that we can help? So putting that out there is one way to. I think as you mentioned, Ray, is a nice way to position it.
Yep. And I think, yeah, Phil mentions, making it about the prospect and client more than ever, right? So this is about, and I think if there was ever a time, which is painful, but if there's ever a time to be the go-giver and kind of pay it forward and say, what can we do? And that's actually how this webinar came together, which is, hey, maybe we can share some thoughts, some best practices, and continue the dialogue, but without expecting something immediately coming out. So I think everybody's trying to navigate. Well, great input. Appreciate everybody chiming in. And let's continue as we're going through this, Sam. We were also talking about, so we understand some challenges. We understand things are moving rapidly, but there are also some opportunities that come out of this. And I know you shared this graph with me. Do you want to speak to this in terms of some of the response that they saw in China, since they're a couple months ahead of us here?
Yeah, I mean, if you ever want to see what the future looks like, let's turn our gaze to the east and see what's happening with our friends in the Asia Pacific. So this is a chart from the CEO of Duolingo, which is the language learning application, and you could see this sharp increase. And what this is tracking daily average usage of the site on a rolling weekly basis. But you can see a massive spike in February, basically doubling usage. And what the CEO attributes this to, as you can see, is he says we had this huge increase in traffic due to people staying home to avoid the coronavirus. So people are, as Ray said, sharpening the saw. In this case, a language learning example, but people are putting themselves, really taking advantage of this opportunity to learn. So what does this mean for us? I think this same chart is happening right now. People are expressing this in different ways, depending on what their field is. But this is the opportunity. And as learning providers, how do we create an environment for our people so that we can help them sharpen the saw during this moment? Because this is what people are looking for right now.
Absolutely. And I think that's a good example where, something you might not think of like language learning, but there are opportunities to do that, and people are taking advantage because they do have a little bit more time. And even, as we heard, well, what content, right? One of the questions prior, what content is best suited? And I think it's really interesting with today's technology and platforms that it is possible to train soft skills, and it is possible to practice and reinforce and do skill application where that might have been more difficult, 5-10 years ago. And an example of that I ran into, and this kind of goes back to your kid's art lesson today, but I received this promotion from the guitar instructor that's taught my son for about 10 years, and he's just a fantastic guitar teacher. And he put it out there that he's now offering guitar lessons over Zoom and doing virtual instruction, and it's a live lesson, and they collaborate and they work just like they would. And you think about something as maybe challenging as guitar, and that's not brand new, but I thought it was really interesting that everybody's thinking, well, how do we do this? How do we make it interactive? And how do we get the most out of it? So, everything from language learning, guitar lessons, there are certainly other options we'll talk about, but we're seeing people being very creative in this environment, and I think it's fantastic. So, we wanted to talk about drivers for delivering sales training, right? Why would we typically move to online or digital learning? And the common things, right? It's speed, because we can get it out there, and we like being able to train a lot of people at scale. So having the same content and being able to provide without flying people all around, right? So that's great. Accessibility, because people may not be able to attend a live session, whether that's virtual or in person. And also the idea of spaced learning, making it continuous, chunking it up, right? So they're learning over a period of time. But even when we have these two edits here, and we did that purposefully, because we probably often talk about efficiency and how it's more cost effective, and there are other drivers we could think about. But Sam, I know you had some thoughts about, today, even as we're looking at this, things are changing. Do you want to speak to, why do we look at some of the other options here in addition to what we might have in the past for digital learning?
Yeah, I mean, think about efficiency. A lot of times with sales training, we think about, well, we need to maximize, salespeople's time in the field. Well, guess what? We're all out of the field right now. so let's think about the new reality, which is flexibility. We're all balancing home and life, home and work in the same 24 hours. And just had this conversation with my wife last night as we're getting ready to go to sleep. Like, how are we doing with this? And so flexibility becomes a business imperative, becomes a personal imperative. How can I get flexibility over scheduling my learning time when I need to? How can I leverage a mix of modalities to fit this new reality that we're all in? So that becomes a dominant theme. The other is collaborative, and I know we hear collaborative thrown around with learning technologies last several years, but now with collaborative learning, this becomes another business imperative, because in the past we would just default to in-person training. Well, that's obviously not an opportunity right now. And in the world of social distancing, where we have to keep apart from each other, digital collaboration becomes essential for our businesses. We can't just have everything be atomized and isolated into individual experiences. And people, let's face it, we're social creatures. Digital collaboration is now business critical.
No, I think, and thinking about the silver lining in some of these things, or to the extent that we can, I know we've experienced that, where the collaboration using Zoom or whatever your online platform, Teams and others, is an opportunity to really perfect those skills. And I know we're doing our daily stand-up meeting, just like we would in a development project, with everybody literally standing up on video and doing a quick round robin, and it's really made the engagement and the collaboration better, frankly, than everybody in their offices or their cubicles. So, I think there are definitely opportunities there, and I appreciate you kind of making those edits, because this is evolving, this is improving, and today's different than it was yesterday, and certainly different than a couple months ago. So let's continue on. I know people were anxious to hear what are some of the different options, and also what's the best way to migrate to some of the classrooms. So we want to again get some input from the group. So I'm going to open up a poll here, and the idea is we want to hear from you on these different options. So are you currently, what's your primary mode been up until now? So let's say up until a couple of weeks ago, are you using ILT, VILT, e-learning and on-demand? Are you using some sort of cohort or collaborative learning, or maybe some additional blended program? So let me go launch the poll here. You should see that pop up on your screen, and you should be able to select an option. So we just want to get a little bit of a pulse of the group to hear what have you done to now, and then certainly we'll talk about what's going to happen in the future. So I know we've seen it all across the board in terms of how our customers like to consume their training, but I would say by far is instructor-led or some combination of instructor-led and blended training, but that's not available to us currently, so we're looking at other options. What do you typically see in your business, Sam? And what do you think the audience is going to, we'll look at the crystal ball here, what do you think the audience is going to have to say?
Yeah, I mean, we're a collaborative learning platform, so we tend to get a little bit of a an audience that self-selects. But that being said, I think there's a real focus on blended solutions overall, using digital in the context of blended. Some use pure digital, but yeah, I'm curious to hear what I read a phrase last night in the New York Times. Thomas Friedman talked about the new initials: before coronavirus, after coronavirus. So this is one of these polls of like, we're looking back, but like what the future is going to be different.
I think that's really an interesting way to look at it. And so, yeah, if we're talking about BC before Corona, then let me go ahead and publish. I think our responses have shown, have kind of stabilized, and I'll share the responses. You should be seeing that on your screen now, and I think you're spot on, Sam. Most of the group had just slightly higher percentage said they were using some blended. So I would assume that's some combination of instructor or virtual or e-learning. Almost 40% of the audience is just using or was just using ILT, and then some using VILT and others. And I think it's hard to just choose one in some cases, which is why blended is a higher percentage. So let's talk about
this is interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, what
this is super interesting, and yeah, I mean, this tracks with what I expected, and I think we have an opportunity here to kind of explain what digital cohort learning is. Probably from the audience here, that may be looks like that's a new thing. Yeah, look forward to unpacking this a little bit.
No, and it's important that people may be doing something like that, but may not be calling it that, or certainly may not be doing that, by itself. But yeah, let's dive into that. So, we talked about instructor-led, and that was almost the top selection there, but that may not be available today, right? So as we look at these others, we've got pure on-demand, virtual instructor-led, we've got digital cohorts, and we've got some blend or blended learning option. Do you want to speak through, in terms of what those mean to you and kind of how you define those, just so we're all on the same page?
Yeah, sure. And then let's go ahead and close out the poll, and so we can show
thank you. Yep.
Show kind of the visual there. Yeah, perfect. So yeah, what we kind of just to kind of go through what these are. I mean, we grayed out or we dimmed out the instructor-led training because it's frankly just not an option right now for the time being. So what are our options? What are our digital options? The two that have been around, that are time tested, is on-demand or asynchronous e-learning and virtual classroom training. And with these, we typically think of on-demand as self-paced e-learning, but there's other self-study approaches like e-texts and video lessons and podcasts that fall into that category as well. And VILT, we're high familiarity with the folks in the audience here today for synchronous or real-time training groups of learners. Interestingly, both of these modalities really took off in past economic recessions. Think back to if you were in the workforce in the early aughts after the dot-com bust, that's really when self-paced e-learning took off. And then VILT, when travel started to be reduced after the Great Recession, really took off as well. And these still meet a critical need today, obviously, and people are really turning to them. But one thing I think to think about is that learners and organizations do expect more than digital broadcast. One of the worst things you could do is take your 3-day training program and put someone behind a camera like Ray and I are doing right now for 8 hours a day and say, hey, we've just transformed our training to virtual. And I've seen some events that are doing that, on the fly. Some are doing it smartly. They're breaking it down to chunks. And some are literally rolling out day-long virtual classroom sessions, which is, I don't know, Ray. That's a good way to put an ice pick through your head to avoid that kind of.
Well, and I'll
pain.
add one even. We had a recent experience where I delivered a session in Europe, and one of the questions was, "Hey, can we just videotape this and then we'll put it up on our intranet for everybody to take advantage of?" And I thought the last thing I want is to be rated by somebody watching, literally 14 hours worth of interaction. Plus, you don't get the benefit of breakouts and group discussion and all the things that happen organically when you're in the classroom that I believe you can replicate in a virtual world, but you certainly can't do it either watching a webcast or watching a recording of a webcast, which might even be worse.
Yeah, exactly. And that's really where digital cohort learning comes in. Think of this as a time-bound, group-based learning journey that happens over a period of days, weeks, or perhaps even months. Where learners have access to content, of course, but critically they're focused on interacting, engaging with one another, and solving real work challenges as individuals and in teams. So it's this collaborative wraparound around these components of digital. So that's where the digital blend comes in, that these things are not isolated and you have to choose one necessarily. You can build a learning journey that stitches these together. You could have, for example, a digital cohort-based learning with kickoffs for virtual classroom, with check-ins for coaching and reinforcement sessions, with on-demand learning built in. So that's the concept of digital blend. And one of the phrases I've been talking about in the last 2 weeks, literally, is just we need to stop talking about blended learning because it has a connotation of wrapping around a classroom, right? You flip the classroom before, reinforcement after. Classroom doesn't exist. So what we need to talk about now is a digital blend. What's the right digital blend? Because by definition, it's all going to be digital for a certain period of time.
Sam, on that note, somebody, Ray, sorry. On that note, Sam, somebody asked, Sam, how people are, how can you efficiently create and implement digital cohorts? What tools are being used and what are the capabilities of those tools? Anton, who's asking this question, she's considering tools like Yammer and Microsoft Teams, so she's kind of looking for some guidance there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are, and we're going to get into kind of there's the DIY, using the tools you have now. So using your set of Microsoft products, like you mentioned, like a Teams, a Yammer, a SharePoint, leveraging Skype. I mean, I'm not here to give a Microsoft commercial, but just to choose one set of tools there you could use. So stitching those together, absolutely, that can be done. The complexity, though, that we have found, and I'll actually share a Microsoft example in a few moments, is that you do run into kind of the switching costs of pushing a learner through different experiences and juggling passwords and breaking kind of the flow of the learning experience. So again, this is not meant to be an Intrepid commercial or an SRG commercial, but that's exactly what our platform does. Is kind of gives you that one platform to author and deliver that digital cohort experience in. And there are other platforms like ours, of course.
Right, and I think to add on to that, at least thinking about it as a key component of your solution, like how are we going to collaborate? What is because I think often it's an afterthought, like, oh, let's create a channel for this, or let's create an email list, right? And then everybody responds to the email list. It's like, no, we need to be more conscious and intentional about how we're going to encourage collaboration. And I think there are some great tools, and you're going to share an example that promote that. But I think it shouldn't be an afterthought. We need to really consider building that in, which when we talk about design should be part of how are we designing or redesigning our programs to take advantage of some of those opportunities.
Yeah.
So let's talk about some of the selection criteria. So some of the things that we might look at. And Sam, maybe you could just walk us through, what are some of the considerations if we're looking at different modalities that come into play?
Yeah, absolutely. So, there are some key questions, and I thought about like trying to create a handy little tool, and I may do that, that you could pump in some values and it'll automatically spit out what you should do. So, but
Right.
I have built those in the past, but it's been a long time, and I think the world has changed quite a bit. So,
Right.
but I'll just give you the questions to think about.
Yep.
So one is, what are your learning goals? Are you aiming? What's the performance objective? Is it to build baseline knowledge? The 101 level information transfer, or are you trying to build and sharpen skills and behaviors, with hands-on application and practice, and so on? Or are you trying to shape and reinforce behaviors? Those are going to take you in different directions. So building baseline knowledge can be achieved largely through asynchronous or on-demand approaches, the self-study, the videos, the podcasts, the e-learning, and so on.
Right. Think about compliance training, right? Or basic background or product knowledge, or hey, they've got to complete this course, right? That's easy to do asynchronous.
Exactly. But when skill building and hands-on application, social learning is required, that's where the semi-synchronous, the time-bound, the cohort-based approach, the doing assignments, getting peer reviews, discussions with your colleagues, having expert moderation along the way. And then for that real-time coaching and reinforcement, supporting behavior change, that's where synchronous tools kind of fit in. And remember, think about the digital blend concept. So number one is what's your learning goal? That's the place to start. Second, then, is thinking about your audience. What are the characteristics of your audience? Where are they located? How many are there? Are there different roles within your audience that you need to have differentiated content or group breakouts or discussions? So sales engineers versus sales execs versus consultants versus other roles that may be involved.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of learning preferences do they have? What have they consumed in the past? How important is flexibility in their learning schedule in this new world of learning of work from home? Any thoughts on that, Ray?
Yeah, I think that's a really important one when we talk about the trade-off between virtual or VILT and more of an on-demand or micro learning is, and we believe we do a pretty great job of simulating a live environment in a virtual instructor-led program with breakouts and opportunities to practice and collaborate. But sometimes, blocking out that time and having somebody come, whether it's, every week for 6 weeks, that's just not going to be available. Now, if we're replicating, well, they were going to fly in for 2 days, maybe that becomes an option, but maybe they can watch those, and we'll talk about a case study of maybe they can watch some videos during the week on their own time, and then we just have a cohort where they show up and ask questions, and we can do some coaching that's more like office hours, right? So I think there are some options, but as you said, it's really driven by what's the audience used to, how receptive are they, and how available are they to be able to dedicate time as we go through. And I know it relates to some of these others in terms of the technology. What have they used, and what do you have in your stack that you can leverage?
Yeah, absolutely. What do they have accessible to them? How mature are they, in terms of usage of the technology? And then, this may sound obvious, but just making sure that as everybody's working from home, do they have bandwidth that's going to support the programs you're rolling out, and so on. This question came up earlier about time. How do you move fast? and that's a question, like, how fast do you need to move? Are we talking? I have here days, weeks, months, but maybe it's hours. Maybe you need to just post a video and get it out. So speed to solution is going to be a critical thing to consider. And if it's just information transfer, you may be able to literally get videos out fast, get a webinar session, get rolled up. But on the other hand, you may have something that you need more time to to deliver something that is a higher fidelity experience, where you think through the lessons, where you have more time and a higher fidelity outcome that you're looking for the design. So that's it, and it's going to lead you to different solutions.
Yep. You know, just as you were speaking, Sam, a question came in from Liz asking about, well, what is the optimum time if you're doing a virtual? And you know, I don't have any data behind this other than just a whole lot of experience with clients and leading those kind of opportunities that we've kind of set on 2 hours as if you're doing live virtual as an optimum. And the reasoning behind that is it takes a while for people to get in, to kind of get up to speed. And if you're going to do some skill application, they need time to maybe go to a breakout and come back and discuss it. You want to make it very engaging, and also make it not just, oh, it's a 1 hour webinar and they're going to show up 10 minutes late and they're going to leave early, right? Which is really hard to do training. I think longer than that, when we've had clients say, well, we're just going to put everybody in a conference room for 4 hours or 8 hours, you know, to your earlier point, I think it starts to lose, you really start to lose that engagement, and it's very difficult to keep them on board if you can't walk around the room, right, and look people in the eye the same way, or you know, give them a really engaging exercise. So you know, I think that's some 90 minutes to 2 hours is great if you're chunking it up and trying to deliver what used to be instructor led in a virtual. But I think there are also some really nice ways to use micro learning and other, you know, we'll talk about with your example, where they're doing some of the background work in advance, and then you're coming in to do more of the application. But I don't know if you had any other thoughts on that. That's just, you know, some of what we've seen from the virtual instructor led.
Yeah, no, just fitting into the time thing is just a comment on the stability, where, you know, we're in a super VUCA kind of volatile moment right here now. So one thing to think about is self-paced e-learning is you have to you build it, you publish it, it's out, and it isn't great for evolving in kind of real-time changes versus virtual classroom. You have a lot of flexibility there, as well as digital cohorts. You could have an 8-week program, 4-week program, what have you. You can develop the outline and the content for week 1, and then based on changes that roll out in future weeks, you can adapt that learning. So think about that stability. And on the budget side, you know, think about do you work with the existing tools you've got and take a DIY approach, or are there possibilities to reallocate, you know, budget, or are there existing technology budgets you can leverage? But I think in many of our worlds right now, there may be possibilities to reallocate budgets. I'll give you an example. For us, an analogy, we have a bunch of conferences we were sponsoring and going to. That's not happening now. So now we're in conversation with some of these organizations that we were sponsoring, and we're saying, hey, can we do more virtual types of events? So I think there's an analogy there for training, where you may have been spending money on travel and on program design and live facilitation and event space. How could that be redeployed to meet the new reality? It needs the new reality.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and there was another question, and then we'll move on to the next topic. Actually, it relates to the next topic, which is really about the best way to migrate. And I think it was Pablo that asked, you know, is it better to take your existing material and try to repurpose it, or to kind of start from scratch? And, you know, let's talk about some of the considerations, and maybe we can answer his question along the way. But, you know, I think there are some ways that we can take that into account and walk through it. Do you want to, you know, kind of comment on that? And what are some of the things that we should think about when we're migrating from classroom to digital?
Yeah. Well, starting at the top of the funnel, you know, like we were thinking about in terms of choosing the modality, it really is starts with assessing your business goals. Like, what are you trying to achieve? Is it building product knowledge for product launch, or engaging with clients during that critical time, gathering client input? Whatever those things are, starting there is a critical point, kind of getting oriented on what's the mission, which is probably self-evident. But before we start talking about migration, I think you want to be grounded in the goal, choosing the modality based on those considerations we just went through. Yep. And then this question of content, of transforming the content. I mean, you really have an opportunity to transform the content. I don't think it's necessary to answer Pablo's question, to throw the proverbial baby out with the bathwater.
Right.
But at the same time, we're not saying that you're just going to simply take your instructor-led program and stick Ray or I behind the camera. You don't want that. You have this opportunity to transform the experience, to flip things from content to exercises. So building missions, building assignments, doing more asking through discussions. We typically find that when we're helping a client convert an instructor-led program to a digital cohort type of program, we're seeing reductions of content in like 40 to 50%. And you know what? That's a good thing, because you're driving towards application and collaboration and discussion, which is where the learning happens. So be prepared to take content out and over-index on collaboration, over-index on discussions and getting feedback from your audience.
Well, I can completely agree, Sam, and I'd add to that, when we think about that for sales training, for instance, we have two very different facilitator guides and programs, even though it's the same core curriculum for selling skills, for sales management, sales coaching, et cetera, where I think you're spot on. You really have to rationalize and think about each of those sessions, if they're virtual instructor-led. What's the experience for the learner? And how are we going to optimize that so they come away from each 90-minute, 2-hour session going, wow, that was helpful and I learned something, as opposed to, okay, we're going to cover 2 out of 6 hours of lecture and, before we apply anything. So we've really tried to optimize, instead of, a group discussion with a flip chart, well, now we either need to use the whiteboard, or we need to use the chat, or we need to do a virtual breakout, and have them discuss it and come back. So it is very interactive. So I think we need to rationalize every one of our interactions and think about how those are going to play in the virtual classroom, using some of the opportunities we have in today's, whether that's Zoom or GoToTraining, or you're using Teams, or, other Adobe Connect, which we used for years. How are you going to leverage those things like polling and chat and breakout and whiteboards, and being able to allow them, and like in your platform, other collaborative technology that's allowing them to connect even offline or in between sessions. So anyway, I just wanted to add to that. Why don't we continue on this list, because I know we want to share a couple of examples and then get to the more questions from the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. You no longer have a captive audience when you're digital, so you have to earn it. And also things like motivating through points and
Yes.
gamification that's really smartly designed can be an advantage. And it's providing this space to learn, giving within we believe within a context of flexibility, particularly now as everyone is not on the same schedule. You've got your kids at home. You need to go out and, I need to take my son to the park and run him a couple of times a day, or we're all going to go crazy here. So you need to provide flexibility, and that's where you want to think about that in terms of your design. Provide space for learning. And probably one of the ones that we're most passionate about is make it ruthlessly relevant. Flip the model. Don't focus on content first, focus on application and practice first, and build your way back from there. And that's one of the reasons why we have seen this kind of compression of content from instructor-led programs to digital, to our collaborative learning platform, because we're flipping the script and we're saying, look, it's all about the missions, it's all about the projects, it's all about the real world challenges. Let's make content really in service of solving a problem.
No, that's great. And we'll just add on to the last one in terms of how do we make this stick over the long term? And I think enabling the managers, and it's something we're really passionate about anyway, but how do you help them then support the program by providing them the coaching materials, by providing them coaching training, hopefully, and reinforcement, so that afterwards they're going, hey, this is great, let's add this to our topic to our sales meeting, or let's in our next one-on-one do a little role play around this skill, whatever those practice, or practice with each other, send me a video of handling an objection, whatever those things are. But I think we really need to continue to engage the managers as part of any of these solutions, because they're going to be the ones engaged long after they've completed the program, or they've gotten their certificate, or they've finish the online course. So I think that becomes even more critical. And we're seeing, how do we coach virtually when we're not there with them? But guess what? Two-way video, we can still ask the same questions. What did you like about it? What did you learn from it? What are you going to do coming out of this? Listening in on calls, call recording. So I think coaching and virtual engagement of the managers is really a key best practice as well. So let's just cover two quick examples, and then we'll leave some time for more questions. So I just wanted to share this experience around how we're leveraging our both in-person and e-learning, virtual and e-learning, for example, sales coaching training. So while we can deliver this in person, full day, or virtual where it's 3 2-hour sessions with a couple of reinforcement sessions, or 18 videos, right? So think about the same learning objectives, the same content, but delivered in 3 different ways, depending on some of the considerations we talked about earlier. But in any case, when we do that, we want to make sure there are assignments, right, that are involved. So what happens in between the sessions, what happens after the session, before the reinforcement. So go out and apply this skill. There's pre-work before they start the training to get them thinking about. So there needs to be field work or missions, which you'll talk about, Sam. But what is it that they're doing to keep that alive? And then the cohort sessions, right, to keep them an opportunity to collaborate or to ask those questions, as we talked about. So whether that's a 1 hour once a week or a group session, that they can all come to, that we're getting them back together. And it also provides a little accountability to say, well, by the end of the month, then do these activities and let's come back in and talk about them and talk about your lessons and your experiences. And then providing a way to share the tools and resources so that there's an easy place for them to go and have experience. And then, ultimately, how do they finish? What does it mean to complete the program? So they're doing probably some type of knowledge check. Maybe they are completing assignments, but we want them to finish, complete, and be able to say, yes, we've gone through this program. So that's kind of how we look at it. And it's interesting because it's really, regardless of whether they're doing live virtual or watching videos, but then the rest of the experience is pretty similar, because we want to make sure that it's an ongoing program and that there are checkpoints built in and the support to go along with that. So I'm going to jump ahead. Why don't we share some of your experiences, Sam, in terms of what you've seen in this example with using your platform and also kind of in the collaborative learning as you were talking about.
Yeah, you bet. So I'll just tell you all a little story here about a small software company based in Redmond, Washington, I'll tell you, I'll let you know a little secret. It's Microsoft. So we were talking about them earlier. So Microsoft, as they've entered the cloud space with Azure and various applications, was really kind of entering as an upstart, because you're competing against AWS and Salesforce and so on. So as they moved into this, they knew that they had a big reskilling challenge for their sales organization to be successful selling cloud solutions. And they had this idea, they're like, wow, like these are big transformations to get salespeople to understand business strategy and financial acumen and understand how to speak, not just with technology buyers, but with CEOs and CFOs and so on. And so, we'd really love to do is send them all to business school, like curate some classes and send them to business school. But how are we going to do that with 15,000 sellers? Like there's these great instructor-led programs at the world's top business schools, but how do we do that? So through conversation, we kind of came up with this idea of a cloud mini MBA. And so it's this transformation from the world's top executive ed programs into this highly curated set of digital courses that could help them sharpen the saw, as Ray was saying, something that was easily accessible to a global audience, that's contextual to the Microsoft environment, and that was ruthlessly relevant on helping them apply the skills to their top accounts. So the Cloud Mini MBA concept was developed. These were digital cohorts of 500 to 1,000 learners per session, 8-week programs, 2 to 3 hours of learning per week. And again, ruthlessly focused on building an account plan as you go through by applying the concepts to your top account. Big questions when we rolled this with Microsoft were, would they show up? Would anyone participate? Would they engage? And so what you see here is the program that on the screen. So on the next slide, just show you a little bit of what that experience is like. It was an 8-week program, as I mentioned. Every week you'd have a combination of videos and discussions. You'd have videos produced by the facilitating professor who would say, hey, in response to these discussions, here's a perspective, here's some resources you might look at. Threaded discussions that learners are engaging with the content with one another. And then on the next slide, this was where the ruthless relevance comes in. Every week they were applying the concepts to their top accounts. So here, I think they were working on something related to understanding value chains. That's kind of an important topic right now. Value chains for grocery stores. We all care about that right now. So how understand the value chain for your customer, and then based on that understanding, what Microsoft solutions might you recommend? And by the way, you've got your peers from Sao Paulo and from Rio de Janeiro and from different parts of the world commenting on your posts, connecting with you offline to say, hey, I serve that industry as well. How might we share insights together? So that crowdsourcing of ideas. And really on the last concept here is just the idea we talked briefly about around gamification. So it's sort of about tracking your progress. You get a badge as you go through here. This program happened to be with INSEAD, the French business school, and it shows you how to advance your career. So there's a way to get have that badge show up on your LinkedIn profile. So this just gives you a simple view of what a digital cohort type experience looks like.
No, I love that. And, it also illustrates that these are components that are successful. There are different ways to go about it, but, reinforcing that collaboration, reinforcing the tracking. And I know it's something that we run into all the time. It's kind of like you are here. Like, how does a learner know where they are in that journey? How do they know what the next step is? How do they get access to the materials? So even if you don't have the platform that supports it today, how can you do that? And maybe it ends up being email and SharePoint or a Teams channel or some other method, but that at least you're supporting those requirements and then moving to, their great opportunities to take advantage of technology to pull it all together. So, I think this really shows how that can all come together, in one place, and gets to some of the earlier questions about, well, wait a minute, should I use this tool or that tool, and are they actually going to show up? So this literally puts it all in one place, which is why it's so beautiful. So that's great. I know you had some results out of this too. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Just super quick. Like, I think the point here is, like, as results were off the charts in terms of readiness, the engagement of learners, the impact, which is their readiness indicator score, and ultimately with revenue. What I think is important to think about here is that this is BC. This is before coronavirus, when people had all kinds of distractions. They're out in the field, they're juggling 10 million things. This was competing against, kind of instructor-led types of modalities for other programs. Now we're in this world that's digital only. So I'm incredibly bullish on these kinds of results being able to transfer, especially now, and we're in the AC world. So anyway, we've got some time for questions, I think, Ray, too, here as we last few minutes.
Yeah, let's do that. And there are a couple of these that I was looking as they were coming in, and I thought were really interesting. One that comes in from Pablo, he says, do you see any rejections or resistance to VILT from older generations? And do we have any data? And I know I have some thoughts on that, but I don't know. Do you see, and I would say, I guess, VILT or, more of a collaborative or digital environment?
No, I think digital, the idea of digital has changed. It's not a thing, a destination. It's kind of the air we breathe, the water we drink, the world we live in. And so clearly, some people are going to have less familiarity and access and experience with digital. But I think that the generational shorthands are a little simplistic, and we see people engaging at I think some of the data I've seen is fastest adopters of social media platforms are older generations. So
Right,
I
right.
think so I think we want to be careful about that. But at the same time, think about my dad, who's not very digital.
Right.
There are some kernels of truth, and we want to make sure we're setting up people for success. And that's where the audience analysis really comes in. It's that it's not just digital tools access, it's like the maturity, the experience in designing with that in mind. You know your audience, and you can get to know where they're at.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just add to that, I think another key part is you need to consider orientation to the platform and the learning experience as part of your design. So
Yep.
every program should say, and we start that, hey, here are the 6 different ways you're going to interact during this program.
Mm-hmm.
Here's how you raise your hand. Here's how you ask a question. Get
Yep.
them engaged, practice, and that should be part of the first session, is getting them to practice, or in your case, orienting them to all the different capabilities they have. And then I think once people see it and they can start using it, that can go a long way. But I agree. I think it's more by industry. Some industries live and breathe on their laptop or in technology. Others only log in to check email. So it kind of depends on where the learner is, back to that audience analysis. I want to take a couple of these others because I think there's some great questions here. One was from Paco, said, how are sales managers going to replace coaching in the field? And it's one that we've certainly thought about, and we've had other, in some cases, they're so distributed, they find it hard to get out into the field anyway, and then now it's not possible at all. But I would encourage people to really think about the virtual technology, whether it's Zoom or Teams or GoToMeeting, whatever, and that you can still have your one-on-ones and you can still have coaching conversations, even if it means listening to a call recording, or even if you weren't there, you can still ask the question, well, tell me how that went. We ask the what, so what, now what questions, right? But hey, well, tell me what happened. How did you feel about that? Reflect on that. And what are you going to do as a result? And it's amazing when the manager learns to ask those questions and then shut up long enough for the individual to actually self-discover. So I do think there's it's part of the coaching mindset. There's training around it, certainly. But I think we're going to see more of that because we have to be able to continue to connect and coach, even at a distance or in a virtual world. So another question that came in was to have suggestions for learners surfing their mobiles during an e-learning session. So I think if that's a virtual and you've got multiple people, I'd say one lesson, and I'm curious your experience, but there's a difference between a cohort where we may have hundreds of people logging in to collaborate versus virtual instructor, which we like to keep relatively small. If you're doing training, 12 to 15 people in that session, you're actually delivering that and getting their feedback. And at least we try to train our learners that we're going to call on them. They're going to be expected to participate. And if they're multitasking or doing other things, we're going to call them out, and they're going to be caught off guard. So yeah, they shouldn't have multiple screens open. They shouldn't be trying to multitask. And I think just like in the classroom, if somebody's on their mobile or distracted, I'll go stand by them and I'll call them out and have them contribute. And guess what? They kind of learn that they can't hide that way. So I don't know if that's
cameras on.
Yeah.
Turn your cameras on.
Yeah, that certainly keeps people engaged, depending on how much real estate you have and bandwidth, but there's nothing like it. So Alonzo, I think you're probably popping in here to tell us we're coming up on the top of the hour. Why don't I turn it back to you? I think we have a few other questions and we're happy to answer those offline. I would also encourage people, if you want to continue the discussion, we're going to share contact information. Please feel free to reach out to us or send additional questions. We will try to capture these and summarize. But Alonzo, let me turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Ray. And that was just about what I was going to say. And yes, my tactic worked. One thing I wanted to add on top of that is we're going to close this webinar, but there is a short survey that will show up as soon as we do that. We appreciate any feedback you may have for us. We're really trying to push the envelope here with the webinars, trying to make them better and better for you. With that, Ray and Sam, great presentation. We had one of our largest live audience today ever. It's been a great webinar, great topic. And thank you everyone for joining and participating today.
That's
Thank
great.
you.
Sam,
All right.
virtual fist bump here
Boom.
because we can't
Elbow.
shake hands.
Elbow.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Thank you very much. Thanks everybody.
All right. Good luck, everybody out there.
Great.
Take care.
Thank you. Take
Bye.
care. Bye-bye.